right, I got 5:30. We are going to call the committee of the whole to order. Roll call, please.
Seth,
Here.
Andrew,
Here.
Todd Kirking.
Here.
Emma will not be here. Todd Spaeth.
Here.
Cindy will not be here. John Thompson.
Here.
Crystal will not be here. And Steve.
Here.
All right, first period for public comment. We don't have anybody in house here, and I do not believe we have anybody online. Anybody online?
Yep. But I do not believe they want to make a public comments here. I think you could.
Okay. Item number 3, review of bike and pedestrian plan.
All right. Well, yay. After a very long time in progress, we are finally here. And I've got Sean Murphy Lopez from Tool, and that was our consultant on the project. And we're going to take you from start to finish, hopefully not too long, about what we did. I think that's really important, the feedback that we got, and then the recommendations for the plan. And obviously this is a committee of a whole. Oh, darn it. I never helped him. See, I'm a terrible host. So yeah, going through the plan, and this is a committee of the whole. So this is obviously not looking for a vote tonight. We'll do that the next council meeting, but we thought this was a good opportunity to be able to go through this with everyone. Are you going to have a green button? Yeah, sorry. I never thought about it.
Your screen and just get.
Yeah, so we'll get the PowerPoint started.
Got it. I think I'm understanding. Yep.
All right. Let's see. And we're gonna go back and forth to talk about it. So I'll jump in every once in a while. All right, you're green.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so my name is Sean Murphy Lopez. I work with Tool Design, and I've been working with Sarah for, I think we've been working for, is it been a year and a half?
At least
Okay,
a
I
year and a
didn't
half, yeah.
actually look to see when it was.
2023.
Okay. Yeah, so I work for a consulting firm, and we specialize in bike and pedestrian planning and design work. And I'm a planner with Tool Design. So that's why I got assigned to do the plan. So I really want to thank you for the opportunity to do this plan. It's really nice for me because I live in not very far from here in a rural area. And so it's nice to be working in a town that I live close to and visit quite a bit. So I think you're going to be advancing the slides. Is that right, Sarah? Okay, so this slide right here just shows the cover page and acknowledges the work of the advisory committee. We met 4 times over the course of the project, and they gave us some great advice, and we'll show you some slides of things that they reviewed and gave input on. The second slide here, the plan is divided into 4 chapters. The first chapter is just like the Cliff Notes. It's just an executive summary or an introduction, and it includes a vision up front. And the vision for the bike and pedestrian plan is that in the future, biking and walking will be a safe, connected, accessible, and separate activity for people of all ages and abilities throughout the community. And we wrote that vision by using that chart on the right-hand side, lower right-hand side. And we just asked people to imagine their ideal biking or walking network in Viroqua in up to 3 words. And so we just used the words that the most popular words that the public here in Viroqua gave us. So the next slide shows the cover page from chapter 2, which is community engagement. And obviously you can see Sarah and her kids who are a big part of community engagement. I'd say compared to most communities I work with, like the client, being like the main staff person I work with, Sarah is very creative and wants to get out there and talk to the people. And this is a picture from Nelson's. I've never done one of these in a hardware store before, but as a regular customer in Nelson's, I know it brings in like a good mix of people from the community and then people from outlying areas too. But this just gives a summary of engagement, and there's a whole appendix I'm going to go into some detail here, but there's a whole appendix that describes all this community engagement if you want to read about it in detail, if you haven't already. So that report summarizes that we had over 600 participant interactions. Most of those, the majority at least, came from people who took an online or a paper survey. And it didn't matter whether you took the online or the paper survey, they were the same thing. And then we merged the results at the end.
I'll pass around an example that we have if anybody wants to look at it.
Then the image from Nelson's that we showed on the previous slide with Sarah and her kids, we set up this wish list at multiple locations around the community. And that's where we got the second most feedback. So if someone didn't want to sit and fill out a whole survey, you know, they could just say, this is what I want, put it on a Post-it note, they'd be done. And those were at the farmer's market, at the public library, the Nelson's, and then at the food co-op.
And the one at the library and the food co-op, like, just stayed there for a while. So we just let people.
Yep. And then we had up to 20 participants at the advisory committee. And then we actually did a walk because we knew that schools and Safe Routes to School was an important component of this. We invited folks to come on a walk, and we actually walked around Pleasant Ridge, Waldorf, and Youth Initiative, that neighborhood. And then we walked around the public school campus as well. And we took a couple of routes and got ideas that way as well. So that's how we got to over 600 participants.
And that the poster in front of you, you probably can't even see it.
yes.
It's an example of like one of the things that we did where we just tried to make it really straightforward, and people had dots and they looked at like the different types of facilities and just trying to get people's perspective on what they felt like were good accommodations.
So we had 4 key findings with the community engagement. The first was that there was an unusually high level, and I'm giving you comparisons from my work over the past. I've been doing this for 11 years now, just working in different communities, and you'll see a chart showing how Viroqua had a high level compared to other communities. But with each one of these key findings, I'm going to describe several bullets here or points that support that key finding so you know how we got to this finding about community engagement. When we met with the advisory committee, we had them do this activity in here when we had those 20 people, and we just asked them to tell us what they thought the top strength was around biking and walking in Viroqua today. And they thought that community support was the top strength. The second point that supports this is when you compare it to the other communities that I and some of my colleagues have worked on. These are mostly Midwestern communities, but some others around the country. And you had about 14% of the population participating roughly in this process. And that was double what the closest one was. And that was in just outside of La Crosse. So a lot of people were really interested. And then we also asked people during this survey to rate different conditions for biking or walking in Viroqua. And they could tell us they had like 5 choices. It was excellent, good, acceptable, and I can't remember what the bad ones were, something along the bad side. And people said that the ease of biking and walking in Viroqua compared to communities of a similar size, that's where they thought Viroqua really excelled. So you had 2/3 of people saying that. So that was number 1. Number 2 is the biggest need for biking and walking is new facilities. And here's how we got to that conclusion. The first was with the advisory committee, where we asked them to identify the top weaknesses. It was far and above the top weakness. The advisory committee created this category called infrastructure or built things, and almost all of them voted that that was the top weakness in Viroqua. And then also similarly, we asked them to look at threats, and lack of infrastructure also was identified in that category as the most popular. Then with those wish list boards that we put at those 4 locations around the community, we had 250 Post-it notes. We had to somehow figure out how to like classify them. And so we put them into these about 7 categories here. And the top 2 categories were that people wanted new or improved facilities on certain roads or intersections. That was a quarter of all the wish list comments. And then another quarter approximately was that they just wanted an expanded biking or walking network. They didn't say it in exactly those words, but those are the buckets we were able to put it in. Then we asked people in the survey, this is kind of like at the end after people take the survey, is there anything else you want to tell us about biking or walking? And then the top thing they told us is they want more facilities for biking and walking. So it's just a theme. You just kept hearing it again and again in the survey. And out of all those conditions, earlier we saw that people thought Viroqua was great compared to other communities. That was the top rated condition. The worst rated condition was the location and number of bike racks for parking. Only 10% roughly of the respondents said that was excellent or good in Viroqua. So that was definitely, there's a need for new facilities, yes, but also for simple things like bike racks. And then when we did the school walks, these are our routes, and we heard a lot about that on the walks, just different needs of physical infrastructure that people wanted to see built. So that's number 2. Number 3, we're halfway through the key findings.
Just real quick,
of course.
and just because sometimes this language throws me off, is when you talk about a facility, can you maybe share some, like, what is a bike and pedestrian facility?
Yeah, like a
Just
sidewalk.
examples, yeah.
Yep. Examples would be sidewalks, trails, crosswalks, curb ramps, bike lanes.
Yeah.
Because the word facility always throws me off when I think about it, because I
Yeah.
think of facility as building and
As this, yeah,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, in the transportation world, yeah, sometimes we do talk about it that way.
Even like the trails that are in the school areas that like connect the kids walking to different, that would be a part of it as well. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, they're not always on public property necessarily. Sometimes they are on, like a bike rack can sometimes be on private property if it's out of the right of way, or school, I guess, would be a public property, but it's not always city property is what I should have said. So, yeah. So the third key finding was that connections to schools, parks, and natural areas, those are the highest things for the community. So a lot of times you'll hear, well, what destinations should we connect? We can't do it all. What's the most important? And we asked people in the survey, we had a map also, and people could put their, how did we ask this? They were important destinations for biking or walking, and they could put points on the map, and the 2 school campuses got the highest results. Then we also asked people in the survey to tell us why biking or walking was important to them. And the top thing that people brought up was kids in this survey. So we know schools and parks, places that kids go to a lot, those were important through that. Then we asked people what the most common reasons were for them biking or walking, and they could tell us all these different things, and parks was the top choice. Exercise and access to parks were the top reason why people are currently out there doing it in Viroqua. And then also this is back to that same question where bike racks were rated low and Viroqua was rated high compared to similar communities. The second lowest biking or walking condition today was opportunities to access natural areas and parks by foot or bicycle. So we know that it's just a high priority and something that can be improved upon. Then the last key finding was that people want more separation between people driving and people biking or walking. So kind of similar to this board that's right in front of the podium here. This is how we got to the results of the survey. So we showed people a bunch of different walking facilities and we showed them pictures of things that are already out in Viroqua today. And we just said, tell us what you find to be, what's your comfort level on each of these facilities. And so the way we ranked these is people who said that they were either very comfortable or comfortable, they're first on the list. So starting left to right and top to bottom. So the image on the upper left got the highest rating. It's a hiking trail in Hubbard Hills. And then the thing that got the lowest rating was sharing with vehicles along Nelson Parkway, where there is no walking facility. There's no sidewalk. There's not even really a shoulder. There's a bike lane there. So also to support this on the bicycling side, some of these images repeated, but some of them did not. We actually created one of the images too. We did some graphic design work or conceptual work. And the thing that got the highest rating here for people bicycling was the shared use path along Highway 14. So this is taken up by WCCU looking north toward Westby. And then the thing that got the lowest ranking was sharing with motor vehicles along East Decker Street. And I think that's close to Northeast Avenue.
That was a made up one too, wasn't
Was
it?
that,
Yeah.
we did make up one for that one, but that was third from the left on the top row. That's one where we showed a separated bike lane and that did get a high rating. But when we didn't show conceptual bike lane, we just showed people what was out there today. That's what got the lowest rating. If you look at the bottom row, the image on the right. So it just kind of gives you an idea. I mean, this is probably intuitive to all of us or all of you anyway. It's like people usually want that separation and this just supports it, what people are telling us. And then the top streets and intersections for improvement, they are in locations with the highest amounts of traffic. So we asked people this question, you know, imagine you had a magic wand and could instantly change one street to make it better. Which one would you select? Main Street was the top, probably not a surprise to all of you. And then the second one was Decker Street. And it quickly dropped off after that. And then on the intersection side, what intersections, because we said you can tell us a street and then you can tell us an intersection. The top intersection was Main and Decker. The second highest was Main and Broadway. And then the other thing that supports this idea that people want more separation, and especially in these busy locations, is that where the city works with the DOT to make several changes on Main Street, we encouraged people to say what they liked or didn't like about those recent changes. And so these were like outside the fairground. They were at Broadway. They were at Decker Street. And then there were a couple down by the hospital as well. This was just one of them. And wherever there was like something that put more of a barrier out there or made it more obvious, you know, where people should be and separating people, that's what people seem to really like. Any comments or questions about what the public told us?
That sheet would have been like the map that they had on the online survey, and they could fill it out paper copy too, but those were current conditions, and then people could mark up. Mhm. So they were asked, like, if you were, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's there. That one's a tricky one because there's not really like there's no sidewalk and there's the bike lane is a very small one.
Yeah, exactly. These show existing facilities, and then at the bottom, people could add their comments, and that's how we got to some of those, like that destination map where we showed that the schools were the most popular. We got to it because we asked people to draw on the map and tell us that. So if anyone else wants this. just let me know. Okay, so then we started writing the plan based on what the public told us. And this was a very early draft. This is something I created, so it doesn't look that great. Things that look better, I have someone who can help me at tool design. So this is just a Word document. We took this drafts to the advisory committee and got feedback on it. And then after we got feedback, we started fleshing out each one of these different goals or strategies. So there are three main goals. The first goal is to expand and better connect the network for biking and walking. And then this one has three strategies. And then where you get into the details, those are the actions. And we're going to just walk through some of the actions in here. I guess I would encourage you to think about these like it's kind of like a menu of things that the city can choose from. You're not going to do all this at once. Just because you adopt the plan doesn't mean you're executing all of them. It's really a list of things that you can pick and choose from to address some of the issues that the public was bringing up. And I'm sure these issues will come up as years go on, and they probably already have been coming up. So we're just going to walk through some of them, not all of them, probably about half of them. So the first one, and I'm actually going to pull up my chart right here so I can kind of read from these as we go through. So the first one is to design and build a network of trails separated from motor vehicles. And when we talk about separated trails, we mostly are talking about the images on the upper left, like out along Highway 14, and then the lower image. So it gets communities sometimes need to get a little creative because, you know, you might only rebuild a street every 40 years, and that might be your only chance to put a trail next to it. But sometimes 40 years is a little long to wait, and people get anxious to see something happen quicker. So this image is from a smaller town. It's from Northfield, Minnesota. It's bigger than Viroqua, but not that much bigger. And what they recently did is they took one of their streets and they actually saw cut the pavement out, and they added that concrete curb on the left-hand side. And then between the sidewalk and that new curb that they put in, that's a two-way bike lane. It's separated. It's some people would call it a trail, some people would call it a bike lane, but it's the place for bicyclists to ride, and they're no longer mixing, and there's something more than a painted white line. So that's what we mean by a trail. It's got to have some sort of physical separation. Action 1.2 is to complete the existing sidewalk and curb ramp network within the core neighborhoods of Viroqua. So with this one, we only had 30% of respondents rating the quality of the existing walking network as excellent or good. So most people said it was either acceptable, not good, or bad. And completing what you already, you know, the city has already over the years put a lot of investment, property owners to have put investment into building these sidewalks, but sometimes you'll be walking down a block and then you'll get to a house and all of a sudden the sidewalk is gone. And so finishing what's already started would really help to improve the public's perception of that existing bike network to make sure it's working well. So here are just a couple images where you see sidewalks for part of the block and not other parts of the block.
And that one on the bottom corner is actually by the school.
So can you help me understand when you say core neighborhoods, what percentage of the city are we talking about with that?
Mm.
I know that might be a tough question. Maybe
Yeah.
that's not the right way to conceptualize it, but
It's like
Looks like about 60%. So that map that we passed around earlier, so the city went around and mapped every sidewalk when
Okay.
we started this project. So we know what's out there today, and you can compare it. But mostly I think we mean like the older parts of town. So say houses that were built before 1960, give or take, 10 years. And we have a map that shows like what's missing too. And each one of those we have project numbers for. So we'll show that later on so you can get an idea of like what's the amount of work and how many miles of sidewalk would you have to build to really complete it. The next action is to extend the sidewalk network into newer neighborhoods. But really with those, focus on connections between schools, parks, and low-income housing or apartments. So with this one, this is a little more challenging because people already have trees up, they've got driveways, sometimes they have fences, they're very used to their yard going all the way out to the curb. So it can be challenging, so that's why we're really trying to focus on those most important connections. So if kids need to get, say, for example, from the trailer court just north of the school down to the school, how do we get them there? Because that's a really important connection to be made. And there was one point on that.
Sorry.
Just about, we did a little analysis of Census Bureau data. And the Census Bureau, they ask people when they do the census, how many vehicles do you have in your house? And you all have about 200 households in Viroqua that don't have vehicles. So that's another reason why we're trying to focus on the apartments or the low-income housing. Those might be likely to be more common places where people don't have a vehicle. So the next one here is 1.4. And this is educating the Planning Commission and Council about the need to maintain city standards to require sidewalks with new development and redevelopment projects. So currently, when a new development goes in Viroqua, the sidewalks are not required as long as an exception is made. So that's the way it's written into I can't remember the name of it.
It's like the design guide.
Design guide.
Mhm.
So the recommendation is to amend the city design and construction standards to not allow for that exception any longer. So for example, this image shows a retirement community that was just developed over by just south of Eckhart Park by the nursing home, and it does not include sidewalks. And I think Sarah's the one who, and maybe other people too,
Yeah.
have gotten the complaint, why weren't sidewalks put in after it was put in? So
Well, actually, so they were pretty adamant when they designed it that they did not want to put sidewalks in. And then 2 years after it was built, Bethel Home actually came to me and said, we'd like to figure out a way to get a sidewalk here. People keep complaining that they have to walk on the street. And so it's like the same people who didn't want to do it realized that people prefer to have something to walk on.
So in the plan, there's some text on this, and we tried to pull out similar communities that do require sidewalks all the time. Similar communities in Southwest Wisconsin. So not every community does, but there are a lot of communities doing it. And once it's required, everyone's used to it. The hard part is requiring it when it hasn't been required. That's the big hump to get over.
And if you look at the map of the city, you can really see where they stopped putting sidewalks in. And it's like from that 70s on, it just became a lot less frequent. You can just see where it is.
Okay, so the next strategy, that was about building and improving linear facilities. The next one is to decrease conflicts between motorists and people walking and biking. So the first action is 2.1, and it's to continue to employ new traffic signal technologies to remove conflicting movements and increase motorist compliance with crosswalk laws. So we just put a list here of the things that are described in the plan, different technologies that are out there. The city's already implementing some of these. Obviously Viroqua doesn't have a lot of stoplights, but when they are put in or when they're replaced because of their age, these are different things that can help reduce that conflict in ways that we weren't used to a decade or two ago. The second action under here is to continue to utilize geometric intersection changes. And that basically means like where are the curbs and what about the height of the pavement? Because you can make changes to the way intersections are built to change behavior when people are driving or walking or biking. So we listed a few things at the top here. And then there at the bottom two bullet points, it's very, very common that when people are speeding, people always jump to, we should put stop signs up. But that doesn't stop everyone. That doesn't stop the people who choose to run the stop sign. So if you're really trying to bring more consistent speeds and not just going on trust and signs, things like speed tables like this one right here, that can really slow people down, especially when there's some sort of a conflict or a crosswalk. And then roundabouts, obviously we don't have any roundabouts in Viroqua, but we're seeing them spread in Westby and La Crosse and just south of town. A big concern that we heard through the process here was, well, roundabouts are going to make it less safe for pedestrians. But that's not what the data shows. It shows that severe crashes that involve a severe injury to a pedestrian, those are reduced by about a quarter compared to an intersection that would say just have a two-way stop control. So if you had a four-way intersection and one of the streets has to stop at both of those approaches, two of the approaches, the other two approaches don't have to stop. So a roundabout compared to that reduces those pedestrian severe injuries.
I think to the speed table one you had mentioned before about like the way that somebody goes to a stop sign, like stops and then like kind of accelerates quickly and then stops. It doesn't necessarily make it a safe form of driving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot.
That was a
I think they called it speed spiking in one of the manuals that we referred to, is that people will rush between the stop signs than if there are too many stop signs. So it's just another tool you can put in the toolbox. Obviously, you're still going to use stop signs, but this is something else you can do to affect people's behavior. The next two actions have to do with using high visibility crosswalk markings across the federal and state highways going through Viroqua, and then increasing the visibility of trail and sidewalk crossings at driveways and parking lots. So these illustrate both of those. The upper photo, this is what we call a high visibility crosswalk marking, mainly because this is from the perspective of the pedestrian, but when you're from the perspective of driving down the road, these are much easier to see than if you just put two white lines. They call these ladder crosswalks sometimes. So that's one way to do that, and that's why we're recommending in the plan that the busiest streets in Viroqua consistently get these highest visibility crosswalk markings. And they're not always consistently, they haven't always been consistently used that way in the past. Although there are several of these already out there on the state and federal highways. And then at driveways, one of the complaints we hear sometimes, like say the new Rock Avenue trail that was put in 5 or 10 years ago, is that, you won't always see people biking on it. They're still biking in the street, but there are things you can do at, say, driveways and street intersections to really raise the visibility and make people feel like it's a safe facility. So sometimes people don't want to get up there because of the driveways, and this is one way to handle that. And then we've got an action on
added
the
this
bike
picture.
parking, like we talked about.
I had to put it in because it's, I think, the only public bike rack, but nobody thinks it's a bike rack. I had to. So the reason we had it was when Nora was the Chamber Main Street Executive Director, she like won it in a draw. And they gave it to us, and we were doing the Rock Avenue project at the time, so we stuck it in there. And I don't know if I've seen, maybe once, anybody ever put their bike on that bike rack. Did you? Yes. But like
Good job.
everybody thinks it's like a really pretty sign or something, but it actually is a bike rack. But that's about, I mean, the hospital, the library has some stuff like, but there's actually really not really any bike racks
Yeah,
around.
like those are pretty consistent. And well, I used to live in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and like every neighborhood had the loop. And the reason being it's like that is because where it's a rack, if you put your tire in, essentially all it takes is someone to come by and kick your bike and it bends your wheel, right? So they're made so you can rest your bike against it and then lock it to the hoop, and then you don't have any of the obstruction on your wheel. Essentially, that's the reason why they're like that. But
Yay.
they also make
about
them where they're just they slip over like no parking signs, and it's just essentially like two hollow tubes and then a circle, and you can bolt them to the post, and then so there are things you could do.
Totally.
You don't
yeah.
have to be in a bump out, but yeah.
I have had a bunch of people complain about not having anywhere to put their bike, and they'll put it on a variety of different things. I think they just don't really understand how to use it.
I think if there was more of them in town,
Yeah.
it'd become abundantly clear what they're for.
I thought of actually putting a sign that says this is a bike rack on it, just because I don't really think it feels like they just feel like it's a sign.
I'll do my job. I'll do my duty and park my bike there more
Yes,
often.
please. Uh-huh.
Well, I think the issue is that
I got one in my
somebody's gonna
basement.
walk by and be like, look at that guy
You're-
parked his bike in front of this. sign."
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
'cause it's
it.
branded.
It says it's our logo. It's growing forward. The Viroqua, yeah. Right.
And there are those bike racks too. It's an outline of a bike. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of a unique one, but there's different ways to do it. And I think if this had just been put in without the decorative logo, maybe people would guess it maybe a little more, but it does maybe, I think like Steve said, just take some frequency, if you have more of these, and especially where they're placed, usually you want to place them as close as possible to front doors where people are actually going in. So it's a little obvious. And
Well,
There's-
even if there was like, say, one more loop exactly like that, somewhat close to that one, it'd probably be like, oh yeah, those are bike racks. But the
That's
fact
true.
that it's just one singular
It was
Viroqua
one
bike
draw,
rack,
yeah.
it's kinda-
it looks it's special. It's very special.
It's a very
But
sad little-
there are some creative things. Some communities will, it's such a low cost thing, say if you don't have money to build a trail, but you can oftentimes put money in the budget or already have money in the budget to partner with businesses. There's some towns, they'll do 50-50 cost share with the businesses and say, we'll put up a bike rack in front of your business if you pay half the cost of materials and installation. So that's kind of a nice way to create like a partnership, So the second goal is around maintaining the walking and biking network. And we've got two strategies. One is to improve winter maintenance and the other is vegetation maintenance. So with winter maintenance, the first action is to update policies and procedures for education and enforcement regarding removal of snow on sidewalks. So we've got an image of something that Red Wing, Minnesota does. When people don't shovel their sidewalk, they'll add something kind of friendly looking with the information for folks. It can include things on like why it's important to do it, explaining what the policy or the penalty is, a list of who to contact if you need help, things like that. Sometimes they also get into curb ramps because people who live on corner lots are often the unlucky ones who have to deal with curb ramps, and who's responsible and where's the line between the city and the private property owner is often very confusing. The next one is about prioritizing enforcement of winter maintenance of walking route or on walking routes connecting schools and parks. So this is just a picture I took one day just on Highway 56, just to the east of the public school. And, you know, the city could do something like create a map of sidewalks that are prioritized for winter maintenance enforcement, because obviously you see all the kids, you know, using this sidewalk, and you all have a ton of kids that are walking to school year round. So that could be a way to handle, like, instead of every sidewalk in the city, maybe let's prioritize certain routes to make sure that where there's the most need, that those are getting enforced. Action 4.3 is about designing facilities to make winter maintenance easier. So we've got 3 examples here. The first is a storm catch basin placement. So these are just images from Google, just showing 2 intersections right next to each other here downtown. And the left image, if you look at the way the water flows on this street, it's coming from the east and it's taking a right going north across this pedestrian ramp. That catch basin is placed just upstream of where the water flows, which is great for pedestrians when you're walking, because then that water won't pool in that low spot where the curb ramp comes down. On the right hand side, however, just across from the library, you've got the opposite, where that water is still flowing from the east and it's going to turn north, but the catch basin isn't placed upstream of the curb ramp, it's placed downstream. So all that water is going to be flowing right across, which, you know, in a rainstorm is one thing, but then in the winter when it starts freezing and then melting and you get big pools, those can create some pretty big impediments. And so if you just move where the catch basins are placed, or ask your engineers to be careful about that when they're putting their plans together for street reconstruction, that's a helpful thing for the public and for maintenance staff as well.
I actually showed this already to our main street engineering consultant, and now it's all he talks about when we look at storm stories.
Awesome.
The upstream side. I
That's
was like,
great.
awesome.
Okay,
We're
that's
learning
great to hear.
already. Yeah.
The other thing, the other 2 bullets there are just about curb ramp widths. If you're going to build a trail, make sure it's wide enough for that maintenance vehicle that's going to be plowing the trail in the winter for your public works crews. And then the third thing is trail widths. So if you can't get a 10-foot trail, say you can only get an 8-foot trail, which is about the minimum. If you're going to have pickup trucks clearing that 8-foot trail, an asphalt trail is going to break apart really quick with those tires hitting the edge of that pavement. But if you build it, say, out of concrete, it's going to hold up a lot better if it's too narrow of a trail. So there's just different things you can do with those big projects when you got grants. Make sure that it's going to work for maintenance, for your maintenance crews. And then I think the last one we're going to talk about here is exploring options for reduced private property owner responsibilities. And this is mainly to increase service quality and increase compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So this is very, very common. This is a picture I took next to my sister's house in Madison when I was visiting her in the winter, right across from a school. This property owner did pretty good, but they didn't go out into the street, nor did the street crews come back and clear that spot. So in the lower image, this is from Marquette, Michigan, when I was walking there, and they actually have municipal and business improvement district crews clearing some routes. They don't require property owners to clear any routes in the whole city. So only certain routes get cleared, and they're always cleared by municipal crews. And the big advantage there is that you don't have those piles of snow at the corners, because you've got a little sidewalk, say a bobcat going along clearing the sidewalk. But there's other ways to handle this. It's not always municipal crews. Sometimes there will be business improvement or neighborhood improvement districts that get started where property owners will tax themselves. And you see this a lot up in Minnesota. They'll take some of that tax money and they'll all pool it together, and they'll hire a contractor to do the sidewalk clearing in the winter. So it'd be like Main Street in Viroqua, for example, if a group decided to self-tax themselves. And then a third way is For example, in Michigan, there's a community where they have a group of local residents who bought the machines, they pooled the money together, and they clear all the sidewalks in their neighborhood with a machine. So it doesn't just have to be taxpayer dollars. There's other ways to reduce the burden on private property owners and to comply with the Disabilities Act, which, you know, in that upper photo, someone with a disability, there's no way they could get through that in the winter. And then the last one under goals and strategies is improving vegetation maintenance. And because I live around here, I'm kind of familiar with the Boulevard ordinance and the controversy that brought about and how you all resolve that. But reading through the ordinance, it just covers boulevards. It doesn't cover private property owner vegetation coming out from the lot onto the sidewalk like that left image. So 60 inches is what the Americans with Disabilities Act requires for a clear width for someone going through, say with like a scooter or a stroller or something like that. And then 80 inches vertical, you know, so if I'm roughly 72 inches, it'd be eight more inches. That's the minimum there. So sometimes you'll walk along a sidewalk and you'll be hitting your head, you know, because trees are growing down. And we have some recommendations in the plan about how to amend the current ordinance to make it comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And the image on the right, that's just from a community that created some educational material for the public to describe the new ordinance that they passed.
Yeah, we have like variations on this, but not explicitly all of this. And actually realized that one of the things that I thought was in here was actually specific to only certain situations. What was it, like corners or something like that?
Intersections.
Intersections.
And it was
yeah,
96 inches.
Yeah.
So there's 60 inches, excuse me, there's 60 inches in the center of the sidewalk. Is that going to get changed in the ordinances or what?
It's our choice.
Yeah, yes, we take a lot of,
Again.
we've taken a lot of grief over the years trimming stuff
Yeah.
that way. So it's got to get changed if you're going to do that because well, I better not say no names. We've taken some real grief by doing this. So
There's nothing backing you up in ordinance, but if you change the ordinance and you say to comply with the Federal Disabilities Act, that will give you some backing. Because I think that's a very reasonable thing. I just pulled that image from Street View. I just found a neighborhood where I thought someone might be doing that here in Viroqua, and I just grabbed the image. So
And so right now, the way we do it is we tell people to do it, and then if they don't do it, they get fined and we remove it. But right, we don't necessarily, it's a imperfect setup for everyone right now.
yeah, so we have a little language in the plan, Todd, about how to change that if you all decide to. Yeah.
So just, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you're a
you-
council member, so.
You do.
I do, but I'm not going to be the one cutting it
Yeah.
anymore. So
Well, better say that. So 60 inches from center of sidewalk, so 5 feet from center of sidewalk, regardless of the size of the sidewalk.
So the narrowest you all have is 4 feet, but your standard now is 5. So 60 inches would fit the current standard. And the reason why we're recommending it from the center of the sidewalk is, you know, if you have a 4-foot sidewalk, then you would just have 6 inches of grass on either side, you know. So it doesn't mean 60 inches on each side, just means, I guess, 30 inches on
Center.
each side. So it's 60 inches
Oh,
total.
okay, so I'm looking at that. Yeah, I was.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's- I was gonna say, well, because then you're talking about 2 feet of clearance.
No, no.
Outside of the sidewalk.
No, that would
That's
be
good.
excessive. Like that image on the previous slide, I mean, you probably only got 30 inches of clearance right
It
there.
looks like a 4-foot sidewalk too.
Well, it looks like that hedge is encroaching onto the sidewalk one, so yeah.
So this would, if you had this ordinance update, you know, I think you'd be, you would be just going 6 inches from the right edge of the sidewalk into that hedge. You wouldn't be going feet into it, just half a foot. Although, you know, it's going to grow right back. So, you know, maybe you do go a little further, but
And also on that on that picture, the weeds and stuff growing up between the sidewalk slabs, what can be done with that? I mean, that's a tripping hazard too. So is there something in your plan that accounts for that?
You know, we did not, and the reason why we didn't address that is because I kind of thought that maybe you all were already kind of doing a good job with that, because I think you've been going around and doing some sidewalk repairs,
Repairs.
and that when you do those repairs, there's multiple issues. You know, that can be one of them, but say one of your sidewalk panels is heaving up, that's another. If there's a vertical trip hazard, if you got a gap between the panels, that can be another. And it gets pretty detailed with ADA requirements. So we did not get into that here because it seemed like you all were kind of going down, doing some good. Sarah's been working on some good stuff there with you all. Okay, so to get to like the whole network map, so, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just
Sorry.
gonna say, back to Todd's question then, it seemed like you were getting at something where is there a standard then? Like best
I mean,
practice?
is it already in our
for-
ordinance? Is there something in our ordinance that says
Well,
they have
yeah,
to keep
that-
that stuff out? I'm not sure.
Right, I'm
Not
just, I just to address your question, I think what you're getting, even if we are doing a fairly good job, what is the best practice for not even just trees, but I mean, is that there's growth from the grass next to it that's
Encroaching
encroaching on the
in,
right
yeah.
side?
Right.
Grass in between the cracks, I mean, I suppose that's probably the least of the issue
Yeah.
among the three, but are there?
And I can think of a lot of times it's more educational information that I've seen from communities going out to the public about how do we make the decision when we decide that you have to replace your sidewalk or make some repair to it. So I could look for that educational information and see if that would help. I don't know if I've seen it written in ordinance that because it gets into a lot of design detail, but maybe we can do a little research.
Yeah, there's been one time that we've sent someone a notice that it was pretty bad and that people couldn't traverse because of the weeds that were in the cracks. It was right over here. But in general, it's just so much. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just even so much. So I guess my question for clarification, I don't mean to dwell on a really minuscule part of this, but the hardwood, I'm always trying to use the boulevard language. So like the what do they call it? You can't have a woody
Mhm.
plant, right?
Mhm.
So obviously the vegetation on the right is a woody plant. To the left, you have probably grass or whatever, clover creeping onto the sidewalk. If it's my property, I go in with an edger and I get it off the sidewalk. Is that also what we're worried about in terms of, you know, that section to the right, you know, that diagram to the right is the same concept of, well, you gotta, I guess I'm just wondering, how do you keep low vegetation off the sidewalk, and do the same rules apply to low vegetation as they do to woody vegetation? Again, I don't mean to dwell, we probably don't need to solve that tonight, but just, I guess that was.
But I think that is typically the interpretation of it is that the sidewalk can't be covered with vegetation, you know, and that 60-inch width would include that as well. But I'm going to write that down and we can do a little research on that.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's about the excessiveness of it. I mean, because if it's like no green and, you know, it's like, I remember when we first went out and did the sidewalks, like there was so much damage to all the sidewalks. Even though ADA compliance was like less than half an inch, we just did an inch because it was every sidewalk was going to get hit. And so it's like trying to get the stuff that's clearly impeding traversing. And like I said, we've had that actually where we've sent a notice to someone about it.
It's a tricky one. So that's all chapter 3 in the plan. It's pretty meaty. There's a lot of text, but a lot of images, and it's kind of organized in that way of goals, strategies, and actions that you can choose from as a menu. Chapter 4 is more about, so where are you going to build new stuff? And by new stuff, we mean sidewalks and trails with a couple exceptions. And so we took an early draft of this map last May to the advisory committee to get their feedback. And the sort of yellowish brown lines where there's more of them, those are existing sidewalks. And then the orange, more bright ones, those are ones that we were recommending to that committee last May. So you can see how in the older neighborhoods, we're just trying to complete where there are gaps, but in the newer neighborhoods, we're not trying to put sidewalks on every street because you all will, that will not go well. It's difficult to do this with the public because you're taking something away and you're giving them more responsibility at the same time. And so we tried to be very careful. And if you go to the next slide, Sarah, it's a little harder to see at this scale, but the dotted orange lines are the ones that we're recommending. There are 26 projects. For the most part, they're linear projects, or segments, 21 of them out of the 26, but 5 of them are intersections, and those are all near both school campuses. And then they're also all prioritized. So if you're just looking at, say, the colorful purple and blue dots, each one of those is a project. So there should be 26 of those, although 5 of them are squares, and those are the intersections. And highest priority ones, more near-term ones, those are in the darkest purple color, darkest blue color. And then the medium priority ones are sort of a mid-purple color, and then the longer-term projects are in a light blue color. They might not all get completed within those years that are on the slide, but just to figure out what you would chew off first or what would be the stuff that would be the biggest priority, that's why we put that on the map like that. And like I said, those are mostly sidewalks, but an exception would be this street right here. There's just really no way to put a sidewalk and a street next to each other just because of not only driveways and the width of the street, but buildings. You know, you'll get up closer to Main Street and you'll practically hit a garage foundation and things like that. So in the plan, and this is a little bit earlier in the plan, back in that goals and strategies section where we talk about filling in the sidewalk network, we show a few examples of streets that have been built to make it look more like walking is something you should expect on this street, and drivers can go down it, but it really slows them down visually. So just to describe with this image, what I'm trying to describe in here, in one example, they left the asphalt in the middle of the street, but on either side, they didn't widen the street. They just put a very narrow strip of asphalt in the middle, and they put concrete on each side, just like 2 feet wide of concrete. And it just really narrows it down. It almost looks like a driveway in the image, but it's totally fine for cars to go down it. But this is not going to be ever a high traffic street. You know, there's only a couple of houses here. It's so narrow, it probably discourages a lot of people. You know, there's no stoplight to get out there on the main street. So it's just kind of the way to design it could be a way that would make it fill in this gap in the network, because when you look back at the map, there are no sidewalks running east and west for at least 4 blocks between Broadway and Decker. So that's the challenge, and that's why we put this one in there. And it's a tricky situation, that one. On the bike side, we have 22 projects. Similarly, they're also prioritized. The thing I'd point out about this map is, first of all, that we're almost exclusively focusing on paved trails. Because we heard people wanted that separation, we're not recommending in the future that bike lanes be added. And by bike lanes, I mean like the standard ones where you just have a white line, say like on Northeast Avenue, Nelson Parkway, things like that. We're really recommending this more of a separation between motorists and people biking. And pedestrians oftentimes use this, the trails too, where there's no sidewalk. So there's dotted green lines on this map. There are some situations though we weren't quite sure where the trail should go. And so we created what we called these trail search corridors. So say like where you see the number 26, There's also a line with a hump in the middle going out toward the west, west of the school.
This is the map too. I
This
just
is, yeah,
realized
we have a
we
more,
edited this
the
during
map
it.
in the plans has a few changes to it. But there are multiple, and we actually added a few more based on some input from the advisory committee that you'll see in the plan of those trail search corridors. They're not intended to be a solid line on the map where we know exactly where it should go. There needs to be some exploration that happens. But there are several where we do have a good idea of where they should go, say along West Decker Street, South Street, and then pretty much staying off of Main Street and doing Rock Avenue and Center Avenue, one on each side, at least in the core of town. But there are other ones around as well that we're more certain about in the way the recommendations are written.
Oh, darn it. Sorry.
It's okay. There are exceptions here as well, and two of them, one is on Lewison Lane and the other is on West Maple. So Lewison Lane is in the upper image there, and that's an important connection because of the Prairie Wind development and the VFW trails. And so do you have to put a trail on every street, especially when there's very little traffic on it? No, it's probably not worth the cost. And people won't need it. You won't hear a lot of complaints. So the lower image shows an example of this is a picture from Madison where they have trails on either side of this driveway. And what they've done in order to not have to put a trail in this very narrow spot is they've just put these very prominent high visibility pavement markings on the pavement. So something like that could be done on Lewison and there would be no need to build a separate trail.
What about Sharrows? Like, is that a possibility as well?
It is, and sometimes people will, I would say use a Sharrow instead of that. Sharrows they've definitely fallen. So Sharrows are just a bike symbol on the pavement with two arrows above them, like a chevron. So they kind of
It's just
merge
kind of
the
like
word.
it's like, yes, this is a road, but there possibly would be bike traffic. And then
Yeah.
it's also encourages you to share the road with the bikes.
They do tend to be pretty small when you're going down a road. So the reason why we showed this image here is because it's a lot more visible and obvious to people that it's a shared street than these are much bigger. These are probably at least, that bike symbol is probably at least 2.5 to 3 times the size of a typical Sharrow. And there's usually not the green with the Sharrows either. So that's why we showed this image as well, because it stands out a lot more.
Yeah, I've never seen the green. I've never seen that. I've always seen Sharrows, so I guess that makes sense though.
Yeah, the green is the newly adopted color that is compliant with the traffic engineering models now, or manuals is what I meant to say. So it was under experimental status for a while, and now it's getting much more accepted. So. And then how did we decide those priorities? If you're wondering about that, we had a list of 8 factors. We worked on this with the advisory committee and they weighted the factors. And so we weighted schools the highest, schools and busy roads the highest, and cost and connections to natural areas and parks the lowest. Doesn't mean those things aren't important. It's just how we did the weighting. And then on the next slide, we took each project. So say, for example, South Street, and these were for the trail project. So here's 4 out of the 20-some trail projects. We scored, say, South Street on connections to schools. I think that got a score of 3, and you could either get 1, 2, or 3. 3 was the highest, 1 was the lowest. And then because that had a weight of 6, we took it times 3 to get a score of 18 for South Street for connections to schools. So we did that with every project, all 8 factors, and then we added the scores up, and that's how we came up with the highest priority projects for trails. So these are 4 of the top priorities for trails: Broadway, Chicago, and Decker as well. Oh no, I'm done. No. keep going. It's okay. And then for each project also, we wrote some high level details about each project. You know, if you're curious, like, well, how are you going to build a trail along South Street? Like, how are you going to make that happen? We actually did a little thinking about it. We went down Street View and said, these are the challenges that would have to be overcome. But maybe here's the opportunity to put it on the north side because it connects to Eckhart Park. There's fewer houses, things like that. We tried to do a little thinking about. And then the total miles that are recommended for new facilities are 15 total. And you can see how that's split out between trails and sidewalks and shared streets. So most of what we're recommending is trails at 11 miles, sidewalks at roughly 4. And then the other part of the plan is the city did a Safe Routes to School plan back in 2011 with Westby. And we updated that 2011 plan with what we call an addendum. And that's to make it easier to apply for grants because oftentimes, Sarah who's mentioned, they'll ask for a Safe Routes to School plan. So we want to make sure you had that so you can help bring in outside money to fund some of this because this stuff is expensive. You're going to need outside help, especially to do the bigger stuff.
And a lot of what was in that older plan had been changed, schools that didn't currently exist anymore. So we wanted to make sure it was accurate.
That's it. My voice is tired. I bet your ears are tired.
So happy to answer any questions, but again, we're not doing anything with this today except for you just being knowledgeable about it and then bringing it back at council to be approved, hopefully. So, and again, as Sean mentioned, like this is options, these are recommendations, and then we can proceed from there. I think one of the hardest things for me when I do projects is the lack of that comprehensive look at the city. And then we're always like, should we do it here? Should we do this here? Should we put sidewalks here? And then the conversation gets like really specific to that one area and like, oh, but that homeowner doesn't like it. And instead of looking kind of like at the whole picture and saying what makes the most sense for Viroqua. So for me, this is a really important tool because even, for example, we're doing Center Avenue. Next Public Works meeting, I have some questions for you. And it's like, well, yeah, we know that we're not going to worry so much about Jefferson, Court, Terhune, but we know we want to do something about Center Avenue, right? So, yeah. Anything else? Any questions?
My big question is how do we make it okay to add sidewalk to property that doesn't currently have sidewalk for some, but not for all? Outside of cost.
That was going to be my question. Go ahead. Well,
Yeah,
and
well, and
I'm happy to answer it too, because I think you just said the reason why, right? Is like, because this is the plan, right? Whenever we talk about stuff in the city about why are you doing it that way and not some other way, as long as we have reasons that and create a defensible position, then we feel good about making a decision. But if somebody says, well, why are you doing this instead of that? I'm like, I don't know. That's the worst answer you can get is like, I don't know why we decided to treat you differently than somebody else. But if we have a specific plan and a reason and said, well, we're doing this here because that's the plan. And we voted on it as an elected group of officials. Sorry.
Yeah.
If you want to expand on that, I don't.
Moreover, we've looked at the system wide and looked at priorities and what makes a route important, right? And so, we prioritize things like, for example, looking at things that are related to where school areas are, right? I mean, it's not just arbitrary. The other part of it is many years ago, the Public Works Committee had decided that they had a policy on sidewalks, and that policy was to basically not remove sidewalks and to add sidewalks in areas that were there. Because again, if you have a nearly finished sidewalk, you can either do one of two things. You could start taking all the sidewalk out slowly, because that's usually the request we get is, well, my neighbor doesn't have sidewalks, so can't I just take my sidewalk out? And it, and said, no, it makes more sense for us to complete that sidewalk. And again, obviously in areas where it is more important, higher traffic, where there's no other infrastructure for it.
Right. understood. I just feel like there's going to be, people are going to feel like they were picked to lose, like, so to speak. Also, second question, is there an ordinance against riding a bike on a sidewalk?
Only in the downtown, and it's really not enforced.
Sure.
And then
But-
we would have to look at, and there's actually a number of things in the ordinance, including which direction streets go and which areas parking are allowed in, that we really do need to update, but
I guess that would be my next, it's like we should probably have an appropriate ordinance if we were allowing people to bike
Absolutely.
on sidewalks.
for
Just so
trails. Mhm.
it's like, are we encouraging it? Are we not encouraging it? That type of thing, I guess.
Right. Well, and that's why I think we do need the trails to look different than sidewalks. Right, like Rock Avenue, for example.
Right. But I guess if you're going to hear, well, why are they biking on the street? Well, they're allowed to bike on the street,
Mm.
right? It's not, that's why I don't understand where it's like, well, where do you want them?
It depends. I think one thing I learned in all of this is it depends who you are and what your interests are in terms of like where you want to be biking. Like your hard commuter bicyclist is not going to want the same accommodations as my 5-year-old kid, like
Correct.
it's, yeah.
I get, but that's what I mean. I'm like, a kid is probably going to choose a sidewalk over the road, but just so that I guess we need to educate the community on where and when and how and why that's going to happen, I guess.
There-
The one thing I wanted to point out that I saw where you were talking about going to the school locations or whatever and kind of making those as a priority on the sidewalk clearing and all of that. I just want to remind everybody what's happened in the past, that if we don't treat every location the same, we will have some kickback. So if you're going to do that, make sure you have it as part of the plan that this is where it's going to be enforced. Because I've seen in the past with like, I'm just going to say the Boulevard area and whatever, that if it's not treated the same for the entire city, they're going to come back and say, well, why are you not enforcing it here, but you're enforcing it over there? So just make sure that's completely explained within the plan.
Yeah, and again, remember the plan is like giving us tools to use. So we can choose whether we want to use that or not. And then if we do, we just really do need to make sure everything is buttoned up.
Just two real quick things. One is I'd love to give it a copy of the,
Yeah, it was sent.
was it really? No way.
Mhm.
Well, I guess I just blanked it out. Right? It was like,
Yeah, of the whole thing.
oh, there was a link. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and
I
it's
think-
the plan and all the addenda.
Maybe I just treated it like a movie I was really excited to see and wanted to go in fresh. It's the best excuse. Yeah, I don't want to see a trailer. I want to see it. That's the best excuse I have for why I missed it. Will there be a new iteration, or is that the draft that's going to be
We'll
going?
save any major like changes that somebody wants to
Yeah.
bring forward. Yeah. I mean, we've gone through with the steering committee, and they gave us some input. But yeah, I mean, we're not really looking for global revisions, but if anything, is wanted, we want to make sure that's added in there. Now is the time.
Yeah, I just, when you
Yep.
guys were talking, you sounded like there was a couple maps that were maybe an old map, but maybe
Yeah,
that's
that went
just
on
your
the presentation. I realized that was not the one that's in the plan right now.
Yeah. And then the only thing is a comment. I really appreciate the work that you guys have done. This seems like, I know the bike and pedestrian plan feels like it's taken a long time, but there's an awful lot of good information in here. And I really appreciate the work that's gone into this. This is, as somebody who hasn't touched this at all, to see this come out on the backside of it, it looks like a lot of good work and a lot of information to digest. So thank you for that.
Awesome. Thank you.
So we're planning on like sidewalk on like North Washington. I think the east side will probably be a little better than the west side. I'm just saying, but as long as we're planning this, let's
And see,
put it on the east side.
this from someone who is not owning any property, and the people are making recommendations according to what makes the most sense. But yes.
Well, it is kind of sidewalks are real tricky because they're not like streets, as we're used to thinking about streets. And so when Steve was kind of earlier making that comment about why in some locations and not others. So and this isn't in the plan at this stage, and I don't know how much, you know, there can be a lot of detail, but of course I'm willing to help if things come up and you all go through things. But like some communities have decided to create sidewalk taxing districts where the cost is more spread out evenly, because what's really tough about sidewalks is like if you have to replace the sidewalk in front of your house, I mean, that can be thousands of dollars. And so it's a big burden to people. So there are all sorts of, you know, I shouldn't say all sorts. There are different ways of handling that. And sometimes some of the money comes more publicly from general property tax instead of from specific property owners. But then, of course, you got to find ways to find that money. So it's a challenge still. And then winter maintenance is another thing. You know, if you don't have a sidewalk right now you got to be out there shoveling in the winter. So that's why sometimes the municipal programs or some of those other programs come into play, because it spreads the cost out more amongst people. And complicated formulas have been figured out for if you don't have a sidewalk in front of your house, you're still contributing, but not as much. It's a smaller percentage. I'm just thinking of one community right now. They created this complex formula to create some more fairness. Of course, that's debatable, but what else was I going to say? I'm not sure if I was going to say anything else except that just to your comment, it is still a draft plan. So if you all see something you don't like, make sure to let us know so we can make that change before it comes up for adoption, or if you adopt it with an edit, then we'll make the edit afterward or whatever.
Well, thank you.
Well,
Oh yeah, thanks for
Well,
this opportunity. Yeah.
are
Appreciate it.
there are there going to be updates to basically I guess the crosswalks between the north side of town and the south side of town on Decker? Because I feel like there's one crosswalk by East, and then the next crosswalk is, I want to say, Rusk. Is that right? And then the next crosswalk would then be Main Street. Is that the way it's supposed to be, or?
Well, we can look at the plan.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember off the top of my head what we had in those recommendations, but
Yep.
I don't think there was an added. How did we do it? I need
Yeah.
to
So
more carefully.
I should say specifically, this is not a crosswalk plan for the entire city. And so we're not at that level of detail. But having said that, we did prioritize the school stuff. And so Sarah and I did field observations at several intersections near both school campuses. And we have very specific recommendations for those 5 intersections for what can be done in the future. But we did talk about spacing. But that's something that we did not tackle in the plan. And you could probably spend a lot of time coming up with a crosswalk plan for a community. And we didn't get into that level of detail on like a crosswalk marking policy. And we did address a little bit, but not in great detail.
We did have like the one you're talking about on Northeast Avenue specifically laid out in the plan. And then
Because that intersection is confusing to me because there's a crosswalk on either side of East, but the sidewalk's closed on
yeah,
the
that's
east,
another thing we
east
need
side
to
of
talk about
East,
again. Mhm.
which I find infuriating.
Well, we should talk about it.
You bet.
Uh-huh. No, yes, that's like an issue in itself, but I think it's been there long enough.
Yes, but the intersection of Decker Street with Northeast Avenue,
Mm-hmm.
we do have recommendations listed out for that intersections, which would include some changes to what you're seeing out there today. We didn't get into that issue of the tobacco warehouse though. So there was something we had to pick and choose what we could do. That was one.
That
piece.
actually was something that was brought to the Public Works Committee by the owner a number of years ago, so we could certainly bring back that conversation.
Please.
You'd have to fix that roof. I've seen the snow come off there before, and you wouldn't
That-
want to be on
Hey,
there.
guess what? They can do it.
That's fine, but it'd kill a person. I've seen it
Not if
come
they
off.
fix the roof.
good for a whole committee. Sorry, I'm just looking at the time and I want to make sure we're staying on it, but okay, well, thank you. And we'll
Thank you.
keep talking about these things.
Yeah. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah. of
Anybody
course.
online?
Yeah.
No?
Stephanie was.
Okay. Second period for public comment. Nobody is in house here, so if anybody online would like to make a comment, now would be the time. Hearing none, I would take a motion to adjourn.
Gotta make a motion to adjourn.
This is AJ, I'll
Steve,
second.
Got a motion in a few seconds. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you.